For today's episode, Michael and I are delighted to be joined by Adam Warburton. Adam has got a ton of incredible experience in product. He's the Chief Product Officer at Vypr, former CPO at the Co-op, minor product trainer, and organizer of Product Tank Manchester. He's an expert in crafting product vision and strategy and translating this into the actual day-to-day. He's also been huge on the Manchester tech scene, sharing our passion to help us all evolve our craft, placing a great emphasis on the impact we make rather than the theories and frameworks that we follow. So we're absolutely delighted to have you join us. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You will. And today we'll be diving into what all of this means in practice. So we'll be chatting specifically about the transition between doing product in a large organization to a scale up, and how to create an incredible product culture and what that actually entails. So I'd love to start by getting right into it. We've got a ton of listeners that are intrigued by the difference between big corporations and scale-ups and whether this should be a move that they should make, especially because, I don't know if you've heard it already, but on last week's episode, we had Alex Wachowski, who used to work at Google, and he spent a bunch of time chatting to us about the complexities of big tech firms. So I'm intrigued to get your take on how the transition was from the Co-op, which is obviously a much larger organization, to move into a scale-up.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying right from the outset that for some reason there seems to be this general mentality that everyone should want to work in a startup. And don't get me wrong, it's tons and tons of fun. But there are challenges just like there are in any job. Like no job is perfect and no job is without challenge. And in a way, as a product person, I think it's about like pick your poison or, pick the challenge that you want to face rather than just saying, I'm going to find a job where there's no challenge at all. I mean, as much as in a small business, you can apply some of the theory or apply some of the techniques in a way that's a lot harder in a big business. In a big business, you didn't have to look at monthly revenue and go, can we still afford to hire a team in 6 months? Can we afford to hire these people? The financial realities are hitting way harder in a smaller business. So it really depends on what people want. And I think a lot of the skills that you get in a big organization in being a good, product leader or product manager, you feel like they should be transferable into a smaller business. And I'd say probably half of them are, but half of them actually just become somewhat redundant. And you've kind of got to learn from scratch some of the other things that you maybe hadn't applied or hadn't kind of tested out before.
And on that, which ones would you say are the main ones that become redundant?
I think in the last 12 months, I've used the word stakeholder 2 or 3 times. Whereas I used to describe being a CPO at a business like Co-op as being like chief stakeholder manager. I mean, in reality, my ability to kind of set a compelling vision and direction is going to be somewhat limited by, the volume of senior leadership that exists in a business like that. All super smart, intelligent people with their own views, etc. But the job there is effectively about alignment and compromise. And can you kind of have a vision and not overly compromise in getting alignment to do something that's useful? But ultimately, kind of 80% of that job is working with stakeholders. It feels like a huge chunk of those kind of jobs is explaining what agile is, explaining why we can't produce a 18-month delivery plan with 100% certainty in what we're going to do and why we don't have a requirements document. And like the job was a salesperson job sometimes for the product team. It was, like I say, massive on influence and stakeholders and collaboration. Whereas in a small business, collaboration is both infinitely easier because there's a smaller number of people, so you can actually all sit around a table. So therefore, the job of collaboration just becomes easier. Stakeholders don't behave like a stakeholder. There are obviously stakeholders. Stakeholder is anybody that's influenced by a product or, impacted by a product. So we do have stakeholders, but they don't seem to wield power and authority in the same way that stakeholders in bigger companies do. So that means, like you were talking about on last week's episode, like navigating that complexity becomes far easier. And I think as well, the thing that you have in a small business is like high alignment from the offset because the goal's often really clear. So in a small business like ours, we want to grow. And the way in which we grow is super clear and obvious. We're a SaaS business, so we sell licenses to other businesses for the product. So even without innately knowing a business like that, you know that the two metrics you're going to care about are sales growth and renewals. They're going to be the two things that are going to drive it forward. So you don't have to have like big workshops on like let's all get aligned on like what's important to us. And it's like if you're in that business, you know what's important. Whereas in a business like Co-op that wants to try and grow, or I spent time at Asda and TravelX and O2, those kind of businesses want to grow, but they have like 1,000 ways in which they can grow. So the alignment is on, well, what's the best way? What do we mean by growth? What kind of growth, etc.? What are we actually trying to do here? So there's a lot of that complexity of navigating people. People are inherently complex, whereas in a smaller organization, the complexity that you're navigating is how do I deliver something compelling with more limited people and resources and money than I would otherwise have had.
No, that makes sense. And you mentioned earlier on, like the financials behind working in a scale up. Would you say that that financial pressure changes the way that you might do product?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're not in a situation, thankfully, of, sales ruling the roost, but that is kind of typically what you would hear. But, we're a business and we do 5 million a year in annual recurring revenue. Thankfully for us, that's diversified over 200 customers. So we don't have like one customer with an outsized voice within the overall revenue mix. But if sales came along and said, look, we have a sales opportunity here, it's worth 500,000, like, would that influence a product roadmap? Like, absolutely, yes. Like, because if we're focused on two metrics of sales revenue and renewals, like it hits a key metric for us as a business. So rightfully it would be in the mix. So it definitely alters how you think about product. I also think, in a big business, you have to use lots of proxy metrics to get to revenue and impact. So not to labor the co-op point as such, but if I was thinking about co-op and co-op food and revenue there, revenue is impacted by the weather, the time, and the day of the week. So if it's hot, people go to co-op because they don't want to go to a big out of town shop. They want to have barbecues and stuff. If it's freezing cold, you go to a local shop because you don't really want to travel. And if it's mild, as it happens to be in the UK, overwhelmingly the majority of the time, then you probably do go to a big shop. So if you just looked at revenue, you couldn't really see the impact that you were having because there are so many other metrics and so many other things and activities that happen in that you can't really see what's going on. So therefore, you have to use proxy metrics and go, right, well, we'll proxy that for e-commerce orders because we do that. But actually, e-commerce orders are also influenced by weather, day, etc. So then you go, right, well, we'll look at conversion or we'll look at like month-on-month increases. But actually, in retail, month on month is often not helpful because a lot of retailers do the majority of revenue in the final quarter of the year because of Christmas. So you end up with like loads of these metrics that mean sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint like this is the impact that I had on this business. Whereas in a small business like ours, like it's super easy to go, right, okay, there was this sales opportunity that came along. We did X, we landed the opportunity, therefore we just delivered, a 20% uplift in revenue. We're working on X feature. We've agreed that that'll instigate X amount of a price increase in future years. Therefore, I can instantly tell you what that's worth. So therefore that you feel the immediacy of the impact and therefore you feel more accountable for that.
I think listening to you, Adam, I'm starting to get a little bit jealous, maybe. So I've always done my product work in either government or now at the BBC. So big, organized. But prior to getting into product, I worked in marketing for a startup, and obviously everything was nimble. And if you had an idea, it was good. You could be really quick to pivot and go in that direction. And pivoting at big organizations like can take a lot of time. And as you said, speaking to lots of different stakeholders and getting approval of people you've never even heard of before. In a nutshell, I might be being naive on this, but can you just get stuff done really quickly?
Yes, yes and no. I mean, given there's a smaller number of people to get aligned, that makes it super simple. So I speak to the rest of the exec at 5 o'clock every day of the week. So if we want to do something different as a product team, we have the autonomy to do it, but I also have a daily checkpoint with basically the group of people that might influence that decision. So if we wanted to change our pivot direction, I could do that today, tomorrow, I could do that whenever. But to give you an example of something bigger than maybe just a change of direction, obviously the advent of AI has been kind of everything that people were talking about last year. And we wanted to take some time to properly see kind of where things played out. And, we don't have the resources, I don't think, to be a leader in that space. I'm never going to tell my team to go build large language models and try and compete with an OpenAI or whatnot. We want to piggyback on the back of that kind of work. So I pulled together an investment case in November for our investors in the business to say that I wanted to invest £300,000 in kind of like an innovation stream to explore AI, no commitment on return on investment. That was approved nigh on immediately. We're recruiting and we'll land people, and we'll probably release our first thing in March, possibly early April. So I know that that sounds long, but actually, like, to come up with an idea, get some money, hire some people, build some stuff, kind of like 4 or 5 months feels fairly rapid to go from nothing to like working software. So yeah, you can just get stuff done. But it's not like sometimes people have this thing of like, oh, I could just do whatever I wanted. Like, it's not like that. If you've got good ideas that move the business forward, then yeah, you can get stuff done.
Yeah, fascinating.
And like all of the things that you just said, I'm with Michael. I'm a bit jealous because everything that you've mentioned makes product sound like a breeze. I'm like, you must have so much spare time now compared to what you had at the co-op. But I'm sure there are things that are a bit more complex. So is there anything that you would say is kind of more challenging or more difficult now?
It's more difficult to speak to customers. I did a kickoff for this year with the product leadership team this week, and that's one reflection we had on last year is we didn't speak to customers often enough. At Co-op, or an Asda, if you want to speak to customers, I mean, Asda has 18 million customers a week, so it's not hard to go find some customers to speak to. We have 200 customers, 200 businesses all that willing to engage in research and do things. It's kind of like they're busy or one of many solutions that they're probably using. So getting time with customers is really difficult. So there are things that are definitely harder to do. I also think it's hard to apply some of the product theory it's harder in a startup to do it than people think. Because you kind of think, right, you're going to walk in and you've got, greenfield, come along, do whatever you want, etc. But the reality is that, when I joined Vypr, they'd raised about £3 million with a private equity firm in the summer, contingent on hiring out a product team. So I joined in the September and then started to hire the team. So I've got a group of investors that are saying, I just put £3 million into this business. Like, what's happening for the money that we just put in? Like, and investors that don't expect a return that's, I'll give you your 3 million back. But if you're kind of a private equity and you're putting 3 million in and you're looking for a 5 times return, therefore it's like it's pretty crunchy to turn around and go, right, I'll turn you 3 million into 15 million in a short time period. So what's interesting is when the crunch hits and you're like, right, we're super motivated, we're super excited, we've got a really clear idea of what we want to try and do. Sometimes some of the theory things feels like it slows you down. So you almost like conscientiously don't practice it because you feel like, maybe I'll move faster. And obviously that can be a bit of a false economy where sometimes, slowing down to think actually leads to better outcomes. But yeah, there's definitely challenges in terms of applying the theory given the desire that you have to move really, really fast.
That's fascinating as well, and I can completely imagine that because with that money being burnt through, and you're conscious of that, and you're aware of it, and you know you've got to go and stand in front of somebody. I think that would make you, as you've said, just go, right, we need to get something out the door quickly, forget all that stuff. What I know you said that some of the principles and the theory can go. What sort of things do you think are the first to think, oh, we can do about that?
I'd say, interestingly, one of the things that we keep reminding ourselves about are product metrics. So whilst I've said like it's really clear we know the metrics that drive the business, renewals and sales volume. But when we're working on like a new feature, so we've identified a customer problem and we're like, right, we'll work on this feature. Sometimes it's hard to keep reminding yourself around like sub metrics that should sit beneath those bigger metrics and go, actually, what are we optimizing for here? We're working through rebuilding the entire business because the bright idea that I had was we've got 3 million quid, why don't we start from scratch and do it all over again? Which I'm not regretting, even though I sound like I am. So we're rebuilding the entirety of the business on AWS. It was on Heroku, and we're not bringing over a single line of code. So it literally is a from scratch, can we rebuild this business, but in a way that moves us ahead of the competition that's in the space. So as you're doing that, you've got a clear idea, right? And kind of know where we are, and I know how customers use our product. I know our competitors. I know the level that they're at, and I know where I think I need to get us to go to. So you're almost like, right, well, let's laser set, let's do that as quick as we can. And then you have to keep going, right, well, when we're working on this thing, what's the purpose of this screen or button, and what do we expect people to do, and what behavior are we actually optimizing for here versus this relentless, like just assuming by osmosis you're all on the same page and you don't need a metric because you should all get it. So I think product metrics has been one of the things that have gone, and we're working hard to, bring back into our work. It's also really hard because the new thing we're working on is not live. So metrics also die off when the product's not live because you don't really have any, I can define a metric, that's really easy, but no one's going to use this thing for another 2 months. So it's like, do I need to do it now? So yeah, I would say product metrics is one of the first things that's gone. I think there are other frameworks, like product strategy, product vision, etc. Like we have a vision for the product, we have a strategy for the product. Is it in a neat canvas or a neat framework somewhere? No, it's written in a Notion document that's got about 1,000 comments and 1,000 edits and would probably be difficult to read through and figure out. But the most important thing is if I said to everybody in the team, do you know what we're trying to do? Do you know the value we're trying to create? They would say yes. So it's almost like the formality of doing those things has kind of gone by the wayside, but actually the outcome we're still achieving. And I think that's kind of the principle we have to keep reminding ourselves of. And that's what I kind of keep trying to talk about is, a lot of the frameworks that people see, sometimes you kind of get a bit obsessive with like, oh, I need to apply like this lean canvas. Like the lean canvas is a thing that I'm going to take to my team and we're going to work on the lean canvas together. Rather than going like the lean canvas serves as an alignment tool to align you on 9 different parts of a business or a product that lead to success. Are we clear on the success measures for our product, or are we clear on what success is and the different inputs into our product? Yes. Does it matter so much that it's on a canvas? Like it more matters that everyone's aligned, and you can do alignment in a small business, like I said, through conversation in a way that you can't in a bigger business. So I'd say some of the formality around some of the frameworks that we've lost as well.
Honestly, I really love that though, because I think people get so caught up on the frameworks or like my strategy needs to be perfect that they don't get started. Whereas if you actually just start having those conversations and saying, do we know what bets we're taking as a business? Do we know what success looks like? And if we don't, like how can create that alignment across the organization, especially if you've got a huge hierarchy. So I feel like that's just really powerful. And it's like, it makes sense to strip it back. It doesn't have to be shiny. So is there anything that you've learned from transitioning to a scale up where you'd say, would you know what, actually, like, I wish that I would apply these practices more when I was in a large organization where maybe I didn't worry about this thing or this thing?
Yes, from a framework perspective, but do you know the one that's been the most obvious has been the makeup of a team. So having the luxury in a bigger business of having more money, there's often these notional things that like a team is a delivery manager, a product manager, maybe a product owner, a content designer, a UI designer, a UX designer, a user researcher, 3 devs, 4 devs, a QA, a this, and you go like a team is cookie cutter, and it's like this is what's involved in a team. And certainly at co-op there was like a pressure to conform to some of those things. Whereas in a smaller business, you kind of go, if I just ignored everyone's job titles for a second, just like what skills do I need to try and do this thing? And that's what you end up doing. I mean, in a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about whether or not to move from one team into like 2 work streams. And someone said like, oh, so like, are we going to try and replicate the Spotify model? And I was like, no, we're actually not going to call it anything or do anything. We're just going to do what works. And if in hindsight we look at it and go, oh, that's a lot like what Spotify do, then great. But we've done it for the right reasons then, because we've done it because it worked. We've not done it because somebody else did it and we decided we wanted to copy it over. So I think if I was looking at kind of bigger companies, that would be one thing I'd think about is kind of like team composition, team makeup, and kind of like the skills that you need. And I think you know, there's often when you're in a position of luxury of having kind of lots of people, teams do get a bit bloated. We're really seeing the benefit of kind of like smaller teams genuinely work more efficiently and are so much more fun to be a part of than kind of like big mega teams with all of these different kind of roles covered off. So that's one thing I think I would definitely have carried back. I think there'd probably also be something in kind of like product strategy and vision and it not needing to be perfect and kind of like we've used product strategy canvases and product strategy documents and things like that and tried to say right, every team should have a product strategy and we'll review these every quarter. And actually I think I should have taken that a stage higher than you should have a product strategy and just go every team should know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And like, if that's in a product strategy document, that's great. If it's not, then it's not. But like, they're the most important thing. So it would be moving some of the specific frameworks out of the way and just kind of taking things up a level to first principles. It reminds me, like in some of the minded product training that we do, we talk about the product life cycle. So you've got kind of like alignment, and then you've got the double diamond of kind of like problem exploration, solution framing, and then you move into delivery, and you've got kind of agile delivery, and then you've got kind of like a grow, pivot, or kill in the final, measure, react, grow, pivot, kill at the end. And I say to people all the time when coaching that, like, if you take that a layer up, so rather than kind of walking into a business with your product framework and going, right, I need to have an alignment phase, a problem phase, a solution phase, a delivery phase, a kind of like lean phase of measure and react. What if we take that a level higher and go, we need to make sure everyone is aligned on the problem. We need to know what the problem is. We need to make sure we've got a solution that fits the problem. We need to make sure we can deliver it. Once we've delivered it, we should make sure that we did the thing we said we were going to do and go, as long as I'm doing those things, does it really matter like what framework it conforms to? It's like the principles matter so much more than like the actual framework or the thing that sits beneath it. And I think at times I've definitely like lost sight of that in big businesses and got a bit too obsessive about like the structure and the format and the framework in a way that's just not helpful.
Listening to you there, Adam, I wonder if that formality that exists in large organizations around frameworks and how you present them, there's a lot of that formality that goes along with stakeholder management in general at large organizations. Does that fade away at a startup? And if so, what does your stakeholder management now look like? Do you still have show and tells and who attends them? Like, yeah, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I used to keep a spreadsheet kind of like in a big company, and I had all of my key stakeholders in there. I used to have the last time I'd spoken to them all. I used to have an idea of what I thought their top problem was at the moment, and an idea of what they thought of my team at the moment. I used to review it every Friday morning and go through and go, I've spoke to that stakeholder, right? I need to make sure I speak to this person this week, or, I need to find out that I don't really know what that person's problem is at the moment, or, and use that as a bit of a kind of like temperature check in terms of how connected I was to stakeholders, because I think stakeholder management, if you can do it proactively, is 10 times more effective than doing it reactively. I think the issue in a big company is there's often so many stakeholders that you are reacting all of the time to stakeholder pressure. Whereas, in a small business, if I think about if I had to label them as stakeholders, I've got the CEO, I've got the sales director, and I've got the account management director, or like operations director now. So I've got three, like what I would call stakeholders that I speak to probably 2 or 3 times a day. Their problems are the same as my problems, so I don't really need to keep a log of that. I don't need to know when the last time I spoke to them was because it was probably within the last 4 hours. So therefore, stakeholder management becomes like, yes, you're doing it, but you don't realize you're doing it because it's just a part of being in the business. I'd also say that there's a lot of focus at times like on what your team is. And I found in a big company, the product team, the digital team, that felt like my team because it was a group of people who like I understood, I felt like I belonged, we had the same skill sets, like, same backgrounds, etc. Whereas really, your first team should be the team of peers that you belong to. So the mistake I made, I suppose, at Co-op was my first team should have been the CTO and should have been, other people at an exec level or senior leadership level. Whereas in a startup now, if you said to me, like, what's my team? Yeah, it's the product team, but it's also the exec team. Like, and I feel a sense of belonging to that team. And because I belong to that team, managing them as a set of stakeholders is super easy because they're just teammates. They're not hairy, scary stakeholders to try and convince to do other things.
No, I really like that. And I think that's powerful for people at all levels, because I think a lot of the friction that comes up in product organizations is where there isn't that alignment and you've got stakeholders that are potentially fighting at things that are levels above you. So if you can have that at each layer where you're operating as a team, and even the things you were saying about those daily check-ins that you kind of have now, it's like we all know in the agile world that really helps in our space. So if people can bring some more of that into the people that they really need to be involved, I think that's a super powerful thing to do.
Yeah, and I think I mean, don't get me wrong, I think I've got a bit of an easier ride in that sense of a startup than in a big business, because I think you were kind of alluding to it, Michael, that some of the frameworks are useful in a bigger org because it gives credibility to what you're trying to do. So when you're saying like I want to do a product strategy, it's not just like we're doing it because Adam says we should do it. We're doing it actually because like, look, Roman Pickler says this is a good idea, and look, Marty Kagan says this is a good idea, and Martin Erickson says we should do it, and Teresa Torres says we should do this, and therefore you're almost like borrowing the framework for the credibility it will give you to go and apply it. Whereas in a smaller business, you don't have to sell in the benefit of working or behaving in a specific way. It's like you operate with a smaller group of people. In a smaller business, probably a more tech focused business, they kind of get it already. So you don't have to sell in. So therefore, I don't have to go, we should use this framework because Teresa Torres's like opportunity tree is really good. If anything, if I suggested we do something because Teresa Torres said we would do it, they'd probably challenge me and go, well, what does Adam think we should do? Whereas in a big business, they go, oh, right, somebody else says we should do it. Like maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I think that's what so much of it is about, isn't it? It's about adapting to what your teams need, whether that's like your stakeholders or whether that's the people that are reporting into you. And it's like in a bigger organization, you have got such a variety of skill sets and people from different backgrounds, and you need to make sure you bring people up to a certain level of knowledge and understanding. Whereas I feel like you're probably super in control of the people you're hiring and bringing in now, so it helps you to already have that alignment.
Yeah, so that alignment just becomes baked in. You know, like I say, I think the business, and the other thing that we've not really spoke about that does make a big difference when it comes to alignment and things like that is equity. So the executive team own a share of the business. So when I say, oh, I've got this product thing that's going to like bring in a load of revenue, not only does it help us meet our goals, it helps drive the valuation of the business, which helps drive their equity value, which has a big personal motivator for people to get on board and align with what you're going to try and do. Because it's like, oh, if we do this really well, that'll make you money in your equity if we exited the business. So I feel like the overall sense of alignment just becomes way clearer because of things like that.
No, I think like when you were talking about the money at the start, I think obviously there's an element of it, oh, it can sound really scary. We've got all of these things to do, but also it's like, no, we've got a huge opportunity. We know how to do product well. And again, like kudos to the decisions to say, well, we're going to take everything out and start again now, because it's far easier to do it early than it is to do it
Yeah.
later. So,
And I think you've got to recognize the I suppose to take this kind of opportunity, you do have to be in a position of privilege. Like in a way, to move to a startup or a scale up, you have to be willing to work in a business that's volatile and has a chance of success and a chance of failure. And actually, for some people, that risk of failure is intolerable, and that could be because of personal circumstances. It could be because of home life, or a financial situation, or some other kind of like personal thing. And in a way, you go, I'm privileged enough at the moment to be able to kind of roll the dice and take that risk and work in that kind of business, but that kind of risk tolerance isn't afforded to everybody. So like, yeah, the money is really clarifying for people, but it's not, it doesn't, I'm never so scared I'm pushed into inaction because I can cope with the risk. And I suppose there's got to be an acknowledgement of like, not everybody's going to be in a fortunate enough position to do that. And that should be a big factor for people when they think about making that move is like, could you work in a business where, something changes and in 3 months you don't have a job? I mean, the sector's booming and, people can often land jobs pretty quickly, but like say for some people that risk is going to be tolerable and for other people that would just be enough to kind of put a nail in it. A business like Co-op, Asda, they're not going away. They might make redundancies and they downsize the redundancy packages. They'll be very generous and you'll have a big notice to go into to go find another job. In a small scale of business, it's like the business could just not exist. And then it's like, okay, could I find another job pretty quickly to then move forward? So yeah, I think has to be an acknowledgement of privilege as well.
I'm really interested in, would you encourage more people to try out life at a startup? Taking on board what you just said about, are you able to deal with the risk? What about the change in work culture and having a bit more control? If someone said to you, "Oh, should I give it a go?" What do you tend to say to them?
My bias is to say, "Oh, go for it," um, and I would encourage people to go for it. Don't get me wrong, but it really it isn't for everybody. So we've had at the moment, I think 25%, maybe 20% at the moment of people not pass probation. And that's for two reasons. That's because culturally, I want a culture in the team of high performance. I think work is more fun when you're surrounded by high performing people. When you don't feel like you've got passengers and everyone's motivated and focused, work's more fun and you get more done. So therefore, the bar for passing probation is higher. I mean, we've talked about celebrating when people pass probation, don't just sleepwalk through it and it happens inadvertently. Like you'll know if you're not going to pass probation because it'll be pretty obvious to you and to those around you. So it isn't for everybody. And some people will be drawn into it because it's seen as being cool and sexy and interesting, but it doesn't work out for everyone. What I would say is for the people where it doesn't work out, it tends to be because they think that what made them successful previously will make them a success in a startup. And it's just not true. It's like I said before, my previous role was 80% stakeholder management, 10% people management, 5% recruitment, 5% product management. My job now is 70% product management, 20% recruitment, 5% stakeholder management, and 5% random ass stuff that I have no idea why I get asked to do it. It's like I'm technically in Vypr head of IT and responsible for provisioning laptops and our Office 365 account. And I've never done that stuff before. But you have to be prepared to come into a business and go, I've not done it before, but I'm sure I could be all right at that. I'm sure I could give it a go. How hard can it be to really manage Office 365 accounts? The reality is it's not that difficult. I'm sure at an enterprise level it's difficult when you're doing it for thousands of people. When you're doing it in a 50, 60 person business, it's a bit different. So people that think oh, this made me really successful when I was here. So I'm going to walk through the door. I've got my playbook of how I do things. That's what I'm going to do. It's very painful for them and it's very painful for the people around them. People who walk through the door and go, I'm just going to go with the flow. They're the people that tend to be successful because there majorly is an element of go with it. It's super fast. We'll twist, we'll turn, we'll move. So if you're flexible, that's really fun. If you're inflexible, that's your idea of hell. So yeah, I would say for me, my biggest regret in my career at the moment is that I wish I'd moved to a startup 3 or 4 years earlier. Not much earlier than that, because I actually think a big company was a really good way of kind of cutting my teeth in product, understanding the discipline, understanding technology, understanding design, etc., to then make the move. But I kind of wish I'd done it. I'd done it years earlier. But like I say, I would insist that for some people, it probably isn't for you. So I wouldn't tell everyone to make the move.
That's brilliant. And it sounds from what you said that you could be really good at product in a big organization, but if you move into a startup, the job could change on its head and it's a different job entirely in some respects. So it sounds like less about do you know the product principles, do you know frameworks, etc. Are you effective? Are you resilient? Are you adaptable? These become skills that will set you in good stead in that world, really. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think the people that we tend to get excited about when we're interviewing them is less about where they work, and it's more about when you're talking to them and the kind of stuff that they say, and you get a sense of behavior and attitudes and things like that. Like, you know, if somebody walked through the door and said, you know, I've done product and I've done it for 20 years and I've been majorly successful, if anything in a startup, you're a little bit like, are you going to come in and just go, I've been here, seen it, done it, this is how I do it? Or would you take somebody that's kind of like a year out of uni or a year out of college or whatnot, but has been to mind the product every month for a year, is obsessive about podcasts like this one and reads newsletters and is kind of insatiably curious, has created their own custom GPT when OpenAI announced it. I take that person over the person with 20 years because I'd be like, they're flexible, they're adaptable, they want to learn. That's what's really important to me.
No, it makes total
Gotcha.
sense. It's nice to see the difference. And overall as well, so like to wrap us up, you've mentioned loads of good things there about like using frameworks and like the kind of skills that you would recruit based on and all of those things. And how would you say all of that ties into creating a strong product culture in a company that you know you need to grow?
Yeah, so I think you need people that have a bias for action is the first thing. So you have to people that want to get stuff done and make stuff happen. And you have to have, we call it like impact obsessed. So people that are clear on like, the work I do, I want to make a difference. Like, we don't want people to come through the door who are going to do kind of like design for design's sake or, you know, engineering gold plating or from a product perspective to say like, I'm going to craft like the perfect, like say, vision or strategy or whatnot. You have to have some people that are going to come through the door and go, what I really care about is that in 12 months' time, I can turn around and point to something that made a difference and optimizing for that kind of behavior over other things. So like it's that those kind of principles are the things that really matter. I mean, like we've got a list of behaviors that I crafted when I joined, and I mean we don't really pay attention to them now, so I'm not going to pretend that they're kind of like these golden things, but they were like the basis for hiring the team, the first kind of wave of the team. And there were things like humility is like a thing to bring in. So it wasn't like product principles, it was much more person centric. Like, do you care about having an impact? Do you have a bias for action? Do you care about high performance? There were some others around like respect for other people, respect for differences, but humility has been another big one, you know, like because as a product person, if you want people that are curious, you need people to be humble because you need to know what you don't know. And to be open about that, that's a big dose of humility. So I'd say it's been less about product principles and more about kind of like behavioral characteristics more than anything else.
I'm interested to know, with everything that you said about high performance and also having a bias for action, I know that sometimes startups can have a bad reputation when it comes to work-life balance. How have you found that transition and how do you help maintain the work-life balance of your employees?
Yeah, I think we've said a few times, you know, that what matters to me is that we get the work done. I don't need to see you to know the work's being done. I don't need to count the hours to know that the work's being done. We just have an amount of work that we believe is achievable in a time period, and then we go after that work. I suppose the most important thing for me in terms of work-life balance is I have to set the example, and I need the leaders in the team to set the example. So if I work 100 hours a week, then as much as I can protest to the team that I wouldn't expect they would do it, I'm kind of inferring that that's the standard that gets set. Whereas actually, if I can, you know, model the right kind of behaviors, then that makes it acceptable for the team to do it. So I think it's important that I demonstrate and the leaders in the team demonstrate that working hard doesn't equal working excessive amounts of hours. You know, it's kind of like routinely, you know, I'm an early starter. Like I get more work done in the morning, so I can be in the office at 6:30, 7 o'clock. So you might go, well, it's a bit toxic actually to have somebody coming in at that time. I can leave at 2 o'clock and I'll tell everybody, right, I'm going now. Make a point of it and be like, I'll see you all tomorrow. Because it's like, yeah, I started early, but I'm done for the day. I'm spent at that point in time. I can't carry on. I've kind of exhausted the energy that I've got. So I think it's about role modeling that work-life balance at a leadership level. So I think if I was joining a startup and I wasn't a leader, I was joining kind of as a product manager, I'd look at kind of like the behavior and the ethics and morals of the leadership because they will effectively kind of demonstrate to you what they expect through their own behavior.
That's really interesting, and I've seen that play out negatively as well. When I was still in startup world in marketing, we were in a co-working space, and there were quite a lot of like tech bros in there, like, "Oh yeah, we pulled all-nighters," and you're just thinking, really, like, is that how long is this going to last for in terms of everyone's mental health? So yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a really good piece of advice to look at leadership.
I think as well, though, that goes back to like the way in which you hire and hiring for diversity. And I don't just mean kind of like the diversity metrics that people tend to jump at, kind of like gender and ethnicity. It's like hiring for a variety of different backgrounds. Like actually in a startup, you don't want like that tech bro culture of like, we'll be here till 7. I mean, it's like we work in a WeWork. I love the WeWork buildings. I think they're phenomenal. They're great places to work. But it does really irritate me that they have like the beer taps that come on at 3 o'clock and stuff. It's like, because it just sets it's the wrong signal that you want to try and send to people. We hired the team. I suppose I started to hire the team, and then latterly, obviously, other people have joined and hired. And up until I think it was the 13th or 14th hire, I was the only kind of like middle-aged white hire that we'd made. We had great gender splits, great ethnic splits, but not only that, we had a great just mix of people that enjoyed and did different things. We openly embraced hiring people on part-time hours. So of the 13, 14, 15 people as we've grown, have 3 people working 4 days a week, working a mixture of working patterns and hours. And if you start like that, then it's acceptable for other people when they join. So I think the whole tech bro thing comes down to like hiring and hiring right, and don't hire that role. I could probably hire in inverted commas like your stereotypical tech bro now because it'd be fine because there's a volume of people, a weight of people that have been there long enough now to hold on to a specific way of working that would probably influence that person the other way. Whereas if they're your early hires, then you're in a bit of trouble in terms of culture. Culture is just the people you hire. It doesn't really matter what you write down.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's like you can try and do all of these other things to influence it, but setting those standards and hiring the right people in is the biggest thing you can do to influence it. And I really like what you said as well about like how you like to work, because work-life balance looks different for everyone. So it's nice that you can incorporate that. And on that note, I know that you are hiring at the moment. So are there any particular roles that you're hiring for that you want to mention?
Yeah, we're hiring for a product manager at the moment. So we're looking for somebody to come in kind of around 45, 50K level. We're calling it an associate product manager. So we have a senior product manager and a head of product. So it's somebody to work within that team. We're doing some super exciting work at the moment. So come along. But also, I mentioned before about AI. So we're hiring some more roles when it comes to AI. And we don't know what to call the role because it's kind of a product manager, but it's not a typical product manager. We want someone to come in a kind of quasi product role who's super keen and interested in AI to help define what we should be doing in that space. So if anyone's mega keen on that and is happy working in a role that we don't even know what we're going to call yet, then get in touch. But yeah, and that plays into what I was saying before about like I'm less concerned about job titles and I'm more concerned around skills and capabilities. Like I need somebody in that kind of role whose thirst for learning is so extreme because the sector's moving so fast. So yeah, also looking to hire people in that space, and we also have some engineering vacancies as well. So we've been successful in getting more investment, so we're bringing in another 6 engineering roles at the moment. So yeah, if any engineers listen as well, give me a shout.
Honestly, nice growth. And it's like, it sounds super exciting for anyone that wants to come in and help define what some of these things are. So I'm sure you'll get a load of interest.
I hope so. I mean, when I joined in September 22, we were 27 people, and I was the first person in the product team. Now we are at 58 people, and the product team is about 15, 16 people big.
Honestly, I love it. I'm like, you've really sold it. So I feel like I'm sure, hopefully you'll see your application spike after this. But no, that's been perfect. Thanks for sharing so much wisdom with us. And like, thanks for all of the honesty and like sharing the details of everything that you know. We really appreciate it.
No, no worries. It's been a lot of fun.